Can we get a copy of this? Can we get a copy of this? I'll upload it to YouTube channel. Yeah. All right, ready? Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our presentation. We're discussing last week's topic, which is the politics of Englishes in the world, or I gave a subtitle to it for how much is your English worth. I'm Trent. The other people in my group is Julie over there and Alex here. I'll give you a quick intro. We'll talk about the three circles a little bit and some world Englishes. I'll give you a very quick introduction to the linguistic market and linguistic capital. And Julie will come in with her micro-teaching demonstration, and Alex will conclude with a bit of information. As in from last week, we all know what Cutru's three circles are. Remember, we have the inner circle where we have US and UK. The outer circle, India, Nigeria, for example, and the expanding circle, China, Russia. Does anyone know of any other inner circle countries? Australia? Yeah? England? New Zealand? What about some more outer circle countries? India?
Indonesia.
Really?
Really?
Oh yeah.
No.
Think of a colony, an old colony of England. I just heard it. Singapore?
Malaysia.
Hong Kong? Malaysia? What about some expanding circle countries? We already have China, Russia, Brazil.
Indonesia.
Indonesia? Yeah. Japan? Korea? Yeah, okay. Good. So we can see here, we have the inner circle countries. These countries can be considered to be norm providing, as in the norms of their English language is used by other countries. The outer circle, they're norm developing. For example, they're developing their own forms of English, like Singapore English, Indian English. And the expanding circle are norm dependent, or they get their norms for their English language from other countries. Quite often the inner circle would be more useful, would be more standard. So, stolen from last week. But so now around the world we have lots of different Englishes. So we have the standard, what we might call the inner circle Englishes, and outer circle, which is, I can't remember where it is, Indian English, Bangladeshi English, Indian English, and an unintended consequences of these three circles and world Englishes. Maybe you could thought of the native speaker versus the non-native speaker debate. Okay, this is, for example, the native speaker's English is valued more than the non-native speaker in their language. Quick introduction for the linguistic market and linguistic capital, taken from someone's paper. He draws on Bordeaux's, Bordeaux, 1986 paper when he's talking about the linguistic market. The linguistic market is a field which is occupied by various social actors with different volumes of capital. And this is a field of linguistic exchanges with people trading language varieties and linguistic proficiencies. These language varieties and linguistic proficiencies act as linguistic capital. And these exchanges also produce a linguistic profit. We have the value of the linguistic product is determined by various factors, including the field of exchange, where you're talking, formality, what language of English that you are speaking, I suppose, and how integral the language is to your communicative situation. The trader, I put this as the the person who's speaking, okay, or the institution who might be teaching your language, of the product and their place in the social structure. The value is also determined by where the product was initially purchased or which institution and social authority supports the product. For example, where you learn your English. Okay, it has a value. The product can be, for example, I don't mean the difference between me learning English here as an Australian as a first language, or you guys learning English as a second language in China or Indonesia or whatever. they have different values placed on it, different prestige. The concept of linguistic market also involves three modifications of linguistic phenomena. Grammaticalness or acceptability should be replaced by legitimate language. The relations of communications lead to relations of symbolic power, as in the meaning of speech becomes the value and the power behind of the speech. And linguistic competence becomes symbolic capital, and it cannot be separated from the speaker's social position. This, to me, the linguistic competence, which is related to symbolic capital, for me, in the real world, as us being teachers of English, this economic value of linguistic varieties may be seen in the crass world of the payroll. This is the most, how to put it, plain way of speaking, is that basically some people's English will be valued more than others, and so a teacher of English will be earning a larger payroll, a larger salary than a person who's not a native English speaker. What's your language worth? For example, the linguistic capital in the market is affected by the choices made by the government. For example, in Singapore, they have institutional use and educational policies about languages and different languages, and they're valued in different ways. We have international organisations like ASEAN, which, I don't know if you know, but there's 10 countries in ASEAN. They all have their own national languages. But the language of communication, the official language of communication for ASEAN is English. It doesn't say any standard of English, it just says English. Some of the effects can also come from private forces, for example, international business and communication and how it is performed. International schools, very big nowadays, they teach English. Can be any curriculum, British curriculum, Australian curriculum, American curriculum, Thai curriculum, but taught in English with no specified standard of English. It can also be coming down to personal choice, as in education, or simple accident of birth. Where you're born determines what language that you will learn and what language you can speak as a native speaker. An example of this from the international organisations in ASEAN is Cambodia. When in 2008, if I remember correctly, ASEAN declared that English was going to become its language for communication amongst the countries. Cambodia, before this, had been speaking French. Suddenly, no French. It's English. English is now the market. It has been given more prestige and more value and worth in Cambodia simply because they need it, or not simply, but one of the major reasons is because they needed to communicate within this international organisation of ASEAN. They needed to communicate with their neighbours. One of the things that countries need to think about when they decide upon which language to teach is whether or not they decide to choose an exonormative language variety, which is based on the way a country's second language is used in the country it came from originally. For example, British English, Australian English. If it's adopted by another country or another school, it can be thought of as an exonormative variety. Most outer and probably all expanding circle countries choose the model of an exonormative model. These native speaker models give prestige and legitimacy to the language. The English language, these models have a history. They are codified with standards and norms, as in they have a dictionary, and it can be assessed against. The learnedness can be tested and evaluated against these norms and standards of the language. And another thing that's good about exonormative varieties is that English language teaching materials are readily available. There's a mixture for global and localised markets, and international organisations compete to provide English language teaching experience worldwide. An endonormative language variety, as in Singapore English or Thai English or Chinese English, is based on the way a country's second language is used by the local speakers rather than the way it is used in the country where it originally came from. It is most likely chosen by outer circle countries, and this local variety of English has become socially acceptable. Again, Singapore English and Indian English as a national variety is acceptable there. But there is often fierce debate concerning the variety of varieties used, as in where they're used and why they're used, for example, institutional use. There's always going to be arguments. People are always arguing about different languages and how they should be used because of the prestige that is applied to them. That's my opinion anyway. So, it comes down to this. You want to learn English, or for example, people in countries want to teach English and things. They need to make different choices, and one of these choices is, what English are you going to learn? What English are you going to learn? What English is your country going to teach or have as a standard language? Do you want American English, British English? And there's a very big international corporation there which spreads English around the world. Australian English, pretty good, mate. Yeah. Or Filipino English. Chinese English. One of the questions that you must, there's a missing again. All these come down to, hey, this is quite crass, but it's the closest thing I could get to thinking about linguistic capital is the money that this is the worth that people place and the prestige that people place in these languages. Okay, so things that you need to think about for English language teaching is what sort of teacher do you want? What person would you like, what type of person would you like teaching? Would you like someone who knows grammar very well? Can't speak very well in English, but he knows the grammar back to front. Or someone who's, for example, just come out of university and knows all about CLT and banning the L1 from the classroom because that's the way it's done, apparently. Or a well-trained teacher. Or, for example, someone with a science degree like me and a TESOL certificate. 4 weeks of the TESOL course will only give you a basic understanding of English language teaching. But this type of person you will find in every single country around the world teaching English because it's acceptable, because he is considered an expert because he grew up with that language. If you have a look at job adverts on the internet, must have degree, TESOL certificate, okay, maybe not okay, maybe not necessary. Another choice is that you need to think about which language variety do you want to teach? Which language variety is there for your class? School or nation, is it exonormative or is it going to be an endonormative variety? And again, what sort of teacher do you want? Do you want a native teacher? Or would you like a non-native English speaker? Okay, these are all choices that are made because of the different prestige that is placed on these people and their language that they can teach and use, communicate with. So again, it all comes down to money and the linguistic capital. In this day and age, prestige is placed on money. If you're rich, you're important, apparently. But for us, is to think about which one is more important in your situation. Which language variety would you be teaching? Which one has the prestige that you are looking for? So, the basic question comes down to, again, prestige or the money. Would you want a native English speaker or a non-native English speaker who's very trained and knows the other one, or another choice? It's all up to you. And I think that's me. Thank you.
Right, so thanks for Tran's introduction of our topic, the world English that we learned the last week, right? Okay, so here, this is my part, the micro teaching. So actually this is an activity that we set for all of you. So I really hope everyone can be involved in our activity so that we can have a better understanding of what we learned the last week, okay? So here actually, let's first look at what the activity is. Okay, so this is really simple. Please look at this one. Suppose you are HR from a language school and you're looking for a second language teacher. So here, please look at the red words here because please keep in mind, this is a teacher for the high school English teaching. Please keep in mind, okay? So let's move on. because this is an activity, so I really want to divide you into separate groups, and then I will hand you the handouts that I prepared, okay? So maybe 4 people can be in a group, okay? So please, 4 people, maybe that you can randomly divide into, maybe you 4, and then maybe you can move here, okay? Okay. So maybe you can group, make the group that yourself, okay? So and then I will give you the handouts. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
One for each pair.
Okay. These are the 6 resumes that we have selected from thousands of people, candidates that we finally decided the 6 resumes, and then your task is to select 3 of the 6 resumes, and then maybe you can share with us what the reason that you selected 3 of them. Okay, actually the resumes are really simple, and then you can go through very quickly.
How many should we choose?
Uh-huh.
How many should we? 3, okay.
Yeah. Please pay attention, okay?
One for the back.
Oh, maybe you can give the teacher.
Oh, he's cute. Let's
Yes.
choose him.
Please, pay attention, pay attention. You have to select 3 of the resumes. And when you're discussing a group, please keep 3 questions in mind. Okay, so please look at the board, okay? When you're discussing with your group members, please keep in mind the 3 questions. The first one is, what kinds of standard or qualifications should a second language teacher have? The second one is, do you think that every country has the same criteria regarding second language teacher? The last one is, which is the most important factor that you will thinking about while employing a second language teacher? Okay? So, because this is a critical thinking, when you're discussing, please remember the 3 questions that you have to discuss. Okay, so you will be given 3 or 4 minutes, okay, so that you can discuss. Okay.
What is this?
Sorry that I didn't prepare for.
No, what I mean is 1, 2, 3 is the result. What does it mean? Or is it the prize?
Is there a maximum score for something?
I think even if you don't really feel it,
I don't know how good and bad 100.
oh, so it's bad. It's bad. For standard, if you want to go to YouTube, for example, you have this 500.
But it's paper-based.
Yeah, if it's paper-based.
Internet-based.
Yeah, but it doesn't say anything. It doesn't say anything, so we don't know. But if it's paper-based, by okay, let me just ask. Excuse me, I have a question.
Where is
Is it paper-based or IBT?
IBC. Yeah, IBC. Yeah. This is high school.
Okay.
So I question, where is the school? Where is the school? Yeah. This is a really good question. This is a school in China. Yeah, in China. Yes. So sorry to mention about this.
So not really teaching.
Yeah, in China. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Okay?
Yeah, bilingual. Yeah, and that's fine. I don't think it's there.
We should come here. Which three we should think also think about it.
Where's the contact? Is it in China?
Let's compare the
So So if you want to teach in high school in China, what's the degree of this?
High school, yeah. You're not from China.
Oh yeah.
You're from Japan. Yeah, that's right.
Sorry.
Sorry. You actually need to have that degree to teach like public speaking.
Yeah, that also happens in Indonesia, but in some places you have to have a master.
Okay, yeah. Do you want to teach English? Yeah, master's degree would be the minimum requirement.
So maybe you have one more minute, okay?
Yeah, but she has Chinese
One more minute.
for high school, get high school, and got 2 languages. Where is San Luis? San Luis?
Maybe we need at least 1 year.
Why do we need that?
Because we don't really know how much English knowledge or natural English.
This one, the work experience accountants for 8 years in accounting. Yeah. And that's what I'm
This is
saying.
a Chinese high school, okay?
Let's do that.
Three people. Yeah, three people from the 6 resumes, okay? Okay, so please let's stop here, and then we'd like to share with us. Okay, so who would like to tell us your selection? Yeah, so let's stop here. Okay, so who'd like to share with your selection? Yeah, please, to be the volunteer, okay?
Pow!
Okay.
Yeah, they volunteered. I heard it.
Yeah, please. Yes? Yeah. Okay. No. How?
It must be
Okay, so
just one person.
so one person in a group, okay? One person in a group.
One person.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
We choose the Maggie.
Maggie, please. Maggie and
Maggie and Jerry and Zhang Hua.
Zhang Hua. Okay. Maggie, Jerry, Zhang Hua, 2 Chinese teacher, and 1 Jerry is from
Australia.
Australia. Okay, so please tell us what is your reason?
So first of all, we take the teacher should have the certification.
Okay.
So we put it in our first place.
Okay, great.
And then teaching experience is also very important.
Oh yes.
And we also take their personalities into our consideration. So that's the 3 members that for us to choose the teacher.
Thank you. So this is really typical in China for the selection of the foreign for the second language teacher, right? Okay, so you're from China, so you're so familiar with the system. Okay, so is there any other volunteer want to share with us? Okay, so please raise your hand. Let me know. Okay. Yes. Otherwise, maybe they like to. How about?
Yeah, please. Okay.
So, what's your selection?
In our group, we didn't pick 3 of them.
Okay.
Basically, we just discussed one of them. Pick number 2, Jerry.
Jerry? Okay, the same answer, right? Okay. So what is your opinion?
He looks good.
Jerry's in this series. Okay.
Because he taught English for the kids
Yeah.
in Australia for 3 years, and he knew how to teach English basically, and then he worked in China for 5 years, so basically he knew more about Chinese people and knew more about Chinese students.
Yes.
So and also he got the certificate and his Bachelor of Arts. So yeah.
Okay. So first one, appearance and certificate, working experience. Actually, enough reasons for your selection, right? Okay. So actually, you have mentioned maybe the first question. So could you tell me the second one? Do you think that every country has the same criteria regarding the second language teacher? Because this is the school in China. So what do you think if the school is in Australia? Is the standards will be similar or the same?
I think it's a little bit different.
Different?
Yes.
Yeah. So, what do you think? Okay. So thank you. What do you think?
I think every country has their own criteria of second language teachers, because it also depends on how you perceive whether you're going to choose them just because they are native speakers or non-native speaker, or because of their language experience. In some countries, they want you to have more qualification.
Yes.
So, for example, for teacher in general, for example, in I forget the name of the country. So they even for kindergarten, they want you to have at least master degree.
Oh, yeah.
Like Saudi.
Oh yeah, okay.
So many countries have
I can't
very strict standards for the teacher.
Yeah, so I think every country has different.
Yes. Okay. So actually, take China for example. Maybe the HR will consider whether you're married or not.
Oh.
The age, right? The age, and then whether you have the kids or something like this, and then so the standards will be totally different. Yes, to some degree, right? Okay. So thank you for your sharing. Maybe you can consider the final question together. Okay.
I got a question.
Another question. Okay.
No, what? Why you care whether they're married or not?
Oh, actually,
What that would contribute to your teaching?
Actually, marriage is kind of related to your age. If you're old, maybe you have no qualification or you're not qualified to take part in the examination to be a formal teacher, to be a public school teacher.
So it's about age, not married.
Kind of similar, actually.
Ah.
Yes. If you're married, you're kind of older. Okay.
Well, what if I'm like 18 and I decided to get married?
Yes, maybe this is kind of.
Kids or not.
Yeah.
Because if you are a woman and you are married,
Yeah.
and when the employer is thinking about you, they might think that you might get married in next month, and
Yeah.
then in the next month you will have kids, and I'm not allowed to,
Oh,
So you
yes,
have
this is much
certain
more
regulation
reasonable.
about okay.
Yeah. Very good explanation for me. Thank you. And let's consider the last one. The most important factor that you are thinking about when you're employing the second language teacher. The most important one. Just the one factor, okay? So please. Okay. Just a question. Okay, somebody will say certification. Any other opinion? Yeah, okay. So maybe you have different opinions about this one, right?
Not really. I mean, like
working experience, certification. Okay. So because of the limitation of the time limitation, so we have to stop here. So let's welcome Alex, the next part. Okay. Thank you.
Just graduated.
So after we're doing the micro teachings, we can see that what's actually different countries has some criteria. Different country has different criteria. But when we go through the teaching models, what the different kind of teaching model? In fact, the hiring for the high school English teachers. So when we hiring teachers in different models, we see these two different models: ex-normative and inner-normative. What's actually the different concept for these? The ex-normative refers to some countries, outer circles, or some expanding circles. They set a language system like a monolingual. For example, let's say their target language system as American English. So the people have to put themselves into the American English language system, which means you have to put yourself in a native speaker models. You act like American. You think like Americans. While the internormative is quite usual in Chinese teachings, which means that you teach the English related to your own cultures. You don't have to put yourself into a native speaker system. So it has training toward outward and relying on the foreign forms and customers. beyond the country's second language, usually their countries, rather than used by local speakers. So let's see why we choose these teaching models. First, it got the prestige and legitimacy, which mentioned before the presentations, and readily available mainstream education around the world are keen to see the best way, because the government always trying to looking for the best way to teach in English. For example, in China, so native speakers are more likely to have the prestige and legitimacy than the local teachers. That is sort of a dreary cliche, which may probably be not right, because we have the strengths and limitations, which refers to the advantages and the disadvantages. The advantages and disadvantages, not the X-normative itself, but these for different kinds of people: native teachers, non-native speaker teachers, and even the student. So, for the native speaker teachers, it became in great demand. Maybe in China, like 20 years ago, if you are American, you could be hired very easily, even if you don't need many certifications. It's all because you're Americans. You talk in native speaker models, and even don't need teaching experience in need. And there's a prejudice, which I mentioned before, because students will think the native speakers is much better than the local teacher. But it's not, it really depends. So government will recruit and employ the untrained native speakers, which goes to the limitations. The red parts are the limitations, and the strengths are the black part. So for the non-native speakers in teachers, the abilities, the proficiency are really undermined because the prejudice and and it really reduce the confidence of the non-native speaker teachers, because imagine you are a non-native speakers teacher, and if you pay the salaries like $1,000 or $1,500 per month, but native speakers, Americans, even if it's get untrained, he get 2,000 or even 3,000 more salaries. It will be unfair, reducing the self-confidence. The teacher might think, I'm not professional enough, but it's all because in this model, the choice of the model, choice of the methodology assist with the native speakers teacher, even in fact is a local teacher. So I think in the X-normative native speaker models, the teacher put themselves into a monolingual system. They speak like they target language system, for example, American English. They only thought about American English. So, but for the student, those students who have chance to visit inner circles countries would be benefit from being taught by the well-trained native speakers. So it has the same situations for both of us, because when we're in China, we're going to study abroad, we're going to UQ. So we could try in the X-normative speaking models, thinking that we are actually English-speaking country student, which is the strength for the student. But for most of the second language learners, X-normatives would be untenable and inappropriate for us, especially when you are in China. You don't have to go abroad. So there comes another models. It's called anonormative native speaker models. It's all based on countries used by the local speakers. That's what it says. You don't have to be in a local or a native speakers. You only have to be looking inward and rely on the foreign forms for the customers, such as when in China, when we doing the translations, the content we have facing with, it always comes with the traditional Chinese culture. When we're doing the translation, the teacher asks us to translate what is Spring Festivals, London Festivals, or play the firecrackers. So this is all about Chinese culture, not the Americans' cultures. What Americans do on their Christmas is not that. And we don't have to put ourselves into a target language system. We don't have to think about we are Americans. So the whether a student speak American English or British English, it totally depends on what the pronunciation from the teachers actually usually. When I was in the high schools, one of my teachers had a very bad pronunciations. A student tried to make correct her pronunciations. Guess what the teacher said? She says, "I'm speaking the Latin English." What is Latin English? What the hell? So maybe she's not a qualified teacher for their ridiculous excuse. And for the students, for the local teachers, being in their teaching models. If I'll be a teacher in the futures, I could teach totally related to my speaking models, which is Chinese. I've got the legitimacy, self-confidence, because there's no native speakers compared with me, and sharing the linguistic resources according to my personal experiences, which happened in China, not in Australia. So for the government, no fears of alien values and culture. It means that the only demand for the language teachings is all about your own cultures, because some cultures can be totally aggressive, especially some Aboriginal cultures from west of the American, or some Aboriginal language from the Australia, and they safeguard the unique and precious domestic culture, which I mentioned before, which doing the Chinese traditional sentence translations, we get more close to the Chinese nature. And for the students, it's attainable and appropriate, because most of the Chinese university students, they are actually in the intermediate levels for the English, not advanced. So if you tell them to acting like native speakers, it will be hard. And a teacher who have the bilingual systems, are much better than the monolingual systems, because that's what we learned from the second language acquisition. And the limitation, I think the only limitation comes to with the lack of codifications, which X-normative has, and the grammars, textbook, materials based on local models. So each of these X-normative, and N-normative has its advantages and disadvantages. So which one is better? I think according to the comparisons before, N-normative is overweight the X-normative. And besides, derived from these two concepts, we get another new concept. It's called lingua franca. So here's the definitions, which probably are really hard to read, but I'll just introduce you. You can think about it when you're Chinese, you're talking to Japanese or Koreans. What language did you use? You don't have to. What's the communications? Refers to the intercultural communications. Chinese, Japanese to Japanese country. So when you're talking to a Japanese, you don't have to think about to be acting like a Japanese or even a Korean. Also, the Korean people or the Japanese people don't have to be in these Chinese native speak models, which refers to the X-normative. And you don't have to be in the Indo-normative either, because you are from different cultures. So that refers to the lingua franca. That's all. It's not all about the culture. It's all about the linguistic system. Both of you using English. Neither of us using the Japanese English or the Chinese English. The only way you use is English itself, the linguistic system itself. So it's all about the intercultural communication. But think about another thought, the Mandarins. The Mandarins could be a domestic versions of a lingua franca in China. You know, in China have different provinces, like Beijing provinces, Shanghai provinces. They have their dialogue. They have their local language assistance. And people, if you speak the languages from your own hometowns, people can't understand each other's. So here appears a Mandarin. Every Chinese learn Mandarin, so they talk to each other. So I think it's kind of mini versions for the lingua franca. And So that is, and for the curriculum requires, if you're using the lingua francas, the student will need to be alert which linguistic features cause particular problems, mutual intelligibility. That's all about the mutual. And the curriculum needs to focus on how cultural difference and the implications for the different cross-cultural communication, which I mentioned, intercultural communication. And students who need to be taught in the communication strategies add to the cross-cultural communication. So for today's presentations, we mentioned that it's all about native speaker versus non-native speakers, or about ex-nominative versus inter-nominative. When you're hiring teachers, when you're hiring a target teachers in a job, so what kind of qualitatives you have to be focused on? I think it's quite important, not only the certifications or the professionalities, but also related to our cultural background. So that is our reference for today's presentation, and thanks for listening. Thank you.